here with Jeremy from Rehab Road Trips. How are you?
I'm good. I'm super excited to be here.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm glad I got it right. For some reason, it felt like a tongue twister. I don't know why, but...
You're not the only one that's gotten hung up on it.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's just it's a very unique name that you wouldn't say otherwise.
Yeah, I love that it's unique.
Awesome.
It's yours. You started it, right?
Yep.
So tell everybody what it is.
Sure. So I worked in residential treatment for 12 years. I got sober in 2009 and decided that this is where I wanted to be. These are my people.
Yeah.
I loved being in treatment. I wasn't doing well before treatment.
Yeah.
So like
we'll get into all that.
Yeah, like being in treatment was dope. You know what I mean? And anyway, so I worked in residential treatment for a long time, and then I kind of hit this point where I realized that my efforts were all so singular. It was like one program, like I was saying the same things over and over. It felt like I wasn't really fulfilling my potential in terms of like, I always felt pulled to support the industry overall as a whole.
Yeah.
And all of my effort and attention was kind of funneled into this one thing. And I just kind of hit the end of the road there. And so right before COVID happened, a buddy of mine who's an old friend of mine reached out and said he wanted to get sober. And it was a big moment because we'd all been trying to get him clean for a long time.
Yeah.
And so we're texting back and forth, and he said, "Jeremy, dude, like you got to send me like a video about what's it like in rehab, you know?"
Yeah.
And I'm telling him like how it works, what it looks like, and all that, but he wanted to see a video. So I go to YouTube and I type in, "What is it like in rehab?"
And what pops up?
And all I got were ads.
Yeah.
Yeah. Passages, Malibu, like all this stuff. And I'm not here to disparage my colleagues.
Right. Of course.
Like,
but
we all make ads.
Yeah.
But also it was like all the ads were the same. All the video content was the same. It was like sad piano, a sunrise with a drone shot, and then like, the voiceover, like, "Are you ready to start your life today?"
Right.
And it's like, this is not what rehab is like, like at all.
And it's not really what people want to see.
No.
Or the vision you want them to have when they're thinking about going to treatment. Yeah, I get it.
It's
and
like,
again, not knocking any of that, you guys. Okay.
Not to disparage.
Yeah.
Like, I think that there was a paradigm for video content that we all kind of followed for a very long time. And I think that given the nature of what it is to run a treatment center, it's like, who has time to like make real content every day?
Right. You need that creative person like you
exactly.
to come in.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I went to school, before my addiction, I went to school for film and media. And so I called up my best friend at the time, and he and I had run a very successful podcast for a while. And we had kind of felt like we hit the end of the road with that too. And we were kind of open to what was next for us. And I said, "Dude, I got this crazy idea. Like, what if we got some gear and we cruised around America and like went to treatment centers and filmed like really meaningful content for them, for their marketing, for their brand."
Yeah.
And, the payoff for us like is we get to put all this content on YouTube, on social. And when somebody asks, "What's it like in treatment?" we can send them a video and it actually be representative of what it's really like.
I love that.
Yeah.
So you've taken it across the country.
Yeah, we've only done California so far because there's a lot here.
Yeah, there's a lot.
California is busting with treatment.
Especially Orange County.
Yes.
And LA.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
And where I live in NorCal, there's so much that it's like, man, we're just kind of chipping away.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're hoping to probably next year start branching out into, Texas and the East Coast, Nashville. Like there's treatment everywhere.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Such a great idea. It's such purposeful work.
Yeah.
I'm always preaching that, you get sober and then what? You have to find something that you're really passionate about.
Totally.
So it sounds like this is what it was for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So cool.
Yeah.
So you got sober when?
2009.
2009.
Yep.
Nice. So you've been sober 14
years. Yeah. Which is like crazy to say out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just talking to somebody last night about how it's such a interesting feeling when you think about your past life, right? Because it really does feel like this past life, like I don't recognize that person in so many ways and feel detached almost from it. And I was like processing it last night going, okay, is that healthy? Is it not? Like, should I still feel somewhat attached to that person? But I feel like I've become a completely different person. I mean, is that how it is for you?
Yeah, it's ironic because this morning I was in the gym and I was thinking about, seeing TJ Woodward today, hanging out with you and the crew, and I have these moments where I'll look back and it feels like when I look at my life as an addict alcoholic, it's like it's not mine. It's like I'm looking at somebody else's life that, like, from the outside.
Yeah.
And I wondered about that. Like, I wonder what the mechanism is that creates that distance,
Right.
And what I came to was that when I first got sober, I would tell my story all the time, but I would tell it in a very scripted way. And it was kind of like, you got your elevator pitch for like your addiction.
Yeah.
So you're in the rooms and it's like, oh yeah, and then I did this and I did that. And it's like, like we did a video with Brandon Novak, and he's got his
I just
down.
saw him on Saturday.
Yeah. It's like his story is so like perfectly told.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, yeah, we all do that. We have that. And I think that what happened for me was like, man, I was telling it so often as a story that it almost became like somebody else's.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
But I also think that the power of story is very undervalued in our community, which is so ironic to me. Like to think that I would say at least 80% of the people that work in our field have an amazing story. And we focus so much on the addiction piece and so little on what came after.
Right.
Right. Like if I were to tell you the story of how I got sober, it would stop when I went to treatment. But that's really when my life actually started.
Yeah. Agreed.
And I wonder about that. Do you ever wonder about that?
I totally do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because that's usually, I mean, not usually, but a lot of times that's what it is, and I stay away from a lot of that when we're doing the podcasting because it's good to tell the story, but it's now.
Exactly.
Like, what are you doing now? And of course, you want to have that relatability. Like I put up a post this morning where, as more time I get under my belt, I become more vulnerable with my past, with my story, right? Because I did have it down to like this certain pitch of what I would say. And now I focus on like the key things that I want people to see that were negatives in my life that I've now turned to positives.
Totally.
Instead of just like, oh, let me tell you this story about how awful it was over and over and over again. What do they call that? Where you're like, not romanticizing. People do that too, but
like ruminating.
the war stories.
Yeah.
It's just like, we don't need to hear it over. Like, I don't want to be relatable and all that stuff. You know, like
yeah, that's so real for me. Like I think that there's a lot of wisdom in the story and the way that we fumbled around in life and what we lost, what we gained, and I think there's value in that.
Yeah.
I also think that there's this thing that's happening, and it's been happening for a while, where we sensationalize everything.
Yes.
It's human nature. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that.
Yeah.
I think that for me and my business partner, Dallas, like a lot of what we kind of recognized was like, man, I mean, pain is an excellent motivator. I think that there's a certain point people reach in their addiction where the pain is what pushes them to recovery. And also, for some people, the promise of a better life doesn't feel real. And I think a lot of the reason it doesn't feel real is because the way it's being promised is inauthentic. So what I mean is, like, when I go on to YouTube or I go on the internet and I look up like success stories or testimonials or even just look up treatment centers, it's like the way they portray life after addiction, it's like too much.
Yeah.
And we go, dude, that's bullshit. Like that's not real, especially when you're in the pits of addiction.
Right.
But when people are 6 months sober or a year sober, it's like the game of, let me quit using drugs, let me quit drinking, let me start like putting my life back together. There's like this plateau that people reach where there's like this huge uptick of progress and success, and you're making amends and you're working the steps and you're putting things back together. And then it's kind of like, okay, well, now what?
Now what? Yeah.
Right. And because there's so little about what happens after or during recovery, there's not much there as far as like positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
that's like one of the most important things.
Totally.
Because that is what will set people then down the path of going into a relapse.
Yes.
You know,
exactly.
or just living a life that they're just completely unhappy.
Yep.
You know, and yeah, you're definitely speaking my language, because
Awesome.
I'm so big on that.
Yeah.
When I worked in a clinical setting, I was a case manager and a life coach for years. And that was always my thing. Like, okay, but what do you want to do? Like,
Yeah.
what drives you? What makes
Yeah.
you happy? Like, let's explore that, you know, let's look into those things, because yeah, it's like you get in recovery and you either, you know, work a 12-step program or whatever works for you. And you're doing all this work and you're starting to like feel your emotions again, and you're making amends with your family and your loved ones. And then, okay, now what? Who am I? What do I want to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, what a beautiful place to be.
Yeah. It's
Right.
an awakening.
Yeah. It's like, you know, my friend TJ Woodward, he would say
Love him.
I know, he's the best.
He's the best.
Yeah,
Can't
like-
wait to see you, TJ.
And honestly, like I worked with conscious recovery for like 3 years.
Okay.
And so much of where I am emotionally and intellectually is due to conscious recovery. And just, you know, following TJ Woodward around for 3 years, there's like a certain level of enlightenment that comes with it.
That
you know?
self-awareness.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And so what happens, I think, is like we hit this plateau and we assume it's a bad thing. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm not getting like these dopamine dumps that I was, you know, the first like 6, 8, 9 months of my sobriety. And what we want to do, what I believe is necessary, what we're all being called to do as an industry is not turn a blind eye to the reality of addiction and the nature of drugs. You know, it's like, but we need to hold both, I think. And I don't want to sound preachy, but like I was at a networking event and there's, you know, 30, 40 people in the room, and we're going around the circle, like talking about who we are and what we do. And half the room was talking about how fentanyl is killing everybody. And to be totally honest, it was like super bumming me out, because it was like this, the tone was this, it felt hopeless.
Yeah. Okay. I see what
Of
you're saying.
like, you know, fentanyl's this, fentanyl's that, like X number of people are dying every day. And it's like, so when it came to my turn to speak, I said, you know, fentanyl is killing a lot of people. Drugs kill too many people.
Yeah.
It's undeniable. And also, like, we're all in this room together because we know deep in our hearts that while that is true, it is also true that people can get help.
Right.
That people can recover, that they do recover. I've seen people do the most incredible things in their lives. I've seen people come back from the darkest, most depressing, upsetting environments and situations and create the most beautiful, prosperous, and full lives. Why aren't we talking about it?
Yeah.
You know,
And why do you think that is?
I think the majority is that we operate under the assumption that what will get the click, what will get the view, what will get the engagement is pain. You know, since the dawn of time, marketing has always been geared towards the pain point. And the promise of this product or service being able to remove that pain. And that's just marketing 101. If you had this new car, you could, you know, pull more chicks. If you had like more money, if you had this job, you could then fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And so it's like we offer this good or service, and in exchange for your money, we will remove your pain. And what I think has happened is that drugs have evolved, the nature of addiction has evolved, and our messaging hasn't. And so it's like we're just kind of doubling down on the pain of it all. And it is true that pain motivates change. It definitely does. But like, reading like James Clear, Atomic Habits, he talks about like fear of cancer isn't the best catalyst to quit smoking, right? But being able to run a mile in 7 minutes is. And so what I asked myself is like, okay, if we could authentically really convey what it is to be in long-term recovery, which is to wake up and feel good when you look in the mirror, and to feel good when you go to sleep knowing like, I don't need anything that exists outside me to go to sleep tonight feeling fulfilled in my life. To know that you can create incredible relationships, that you can create meaning, that you can offer value. Those things seem campy. And it's because like if you turn on the news, it's just doom and gloom.
Yeah.
And so I think that as an industry, we've kind of witnessed that paradigm and the efficacy of clickbait and said, okay, let's do that. Like I watched an ad, no joke, this is not an exaggeration.
Okay.
But I saw an ad on Instagram for a treatment center that I won't name. And it wasn't video, it was like animated imagery. And it was this zombie, right? Bones sticking out. And it's like, the eyeballs are hanging down and there's like dark and it's gritty. And the music is like so unsettling. It's like uncomfortable. I'm watching this. And it's talking about bath salts.
Okay.
Okay. And it's essentially a minute of all of the negative side effects of bath salts, all the things that bath salts create. And the imagery behind it is literally like a zombie, right? Like with its bones sticking out, eyeballs drooping, like it's crazy. And then it cuts to this happy piano music and it says, when you sign up for Shall Remain Nameless program, you get your life back. You get this, you get that, you get that, you get that. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, for the first minute of this video, this treatment center essentially villainized their public.
True.
Right?
Right.
It's
Very
like,
insightful. Yes.
if you're on bath salts, right,
then
you're this zombie.
Yeah.
How does that motivate me to change?
Right. Especially when I'm in it.
Exactly. And when
Yeah.
you're in it, what it will do, at least what things like that did for me before I got sober, I'd look at that and go, there's no hope for me.
Because you were that person.
I was.
Okay.
Not necessarily with bath salts,
No,
but
right. But
frickin'
with that,
everything else.
that mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm losing my life. Like I had, multiple suicide attempts. Like I was living in a tent,
Yeah.
my parents' backyard, long story. And I had zero hope. And if I had seen content like that, I can't imagine a world wherein I see a piece of content like that and feel like, you know what? I'm going to pick up the phone and make the hardest phone call I could possibly make.
Yeah.
Because I feel motivated to change.
Yeah.
That's
a really, really good point.
Right.
Super insightful. And yeah, a lot of people don't think that way. And even myself, I can get caught up in that. So I think, being aware of that and finding the balance in it where it's not all that, because people just in general too, like take apart what we're talking about here, but just in general, a lot of people, they find this community in being negative.
Totally.
And I've known people like that, and I've had to kind of cut them out of my life because they want to, oh God, did you hear or this, that? And they don't want to talk about the positive because it feels weird and uncomfortable for them.
Yeah. And it's not as juicy.
Right.
Right. It's not as fun
Yeah.
or glamorous to talk about like, oh yeah, I woke up today and, outside of my coffee, I didn't need anything to get through the day.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of excitement there.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that like, what I learned from TJ Woodward, like really is that like, I'll ask myself sometimes like, man, what would have happened if I read Conscious Recovery before I got sober? If I finished the book and the last page where he offers a gentle reminder that we are whole and perfect, that everything we need exists inside us, that we're not our shame, we're not this disconnected spiritual being, that we are whole and complete and perfect. At the lowest point of my life, when that couldn't be further from my reality, what would it have created if that's what I read instead?
Yeah.
And so every time we shoot a video, I ask myself the same question, like, will this help somebody to feel like maybe, just maybe, I can start a different path,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. So you were helpless, hopeless.
Yeah.
Yeah. Living in a tent in your parents' backyard.
Yep.
Okay. What was the final thing that got you sober?
I'll tell you, it's kind of a funny story, actually.
Okay.
In short, I watched the movie Iron Man.
Okay.
Okay. And it saved my life. Legitimately.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that wild?
That's wild.
Yeah, you wouldn't
That's a
expect me to
first.
say
I
that.
haven't heard that one before.
Yeah. So-
Probably never again either.
Never will. So if I ever meet Robert Downey Jr., I'm going to tell him as much.
Okay.
But here's what happened. So I had tried to take my own life and failed, obviously. And I woke up the next day and I had a desktop computer in my tent, right? So I had an extension cord from my parents' house.
And what was your drug of choice?
Alcohol and Adderall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And anything else that was there, but those were like
The main ones. Yeah.
That was my go-to. And so I had power in my tent. Okay. So like, as far as living in a tent goes, I was like, it was
Pretty
first
hooked up.
class, you know what I mean? Like, and so I went to Target, I had like $20 and I bought Iron Man on DVD. I'd never seen a trailer. I had no idea what it was, but I was out of my mind, you know? So I was like, I'm going to buy Iron Man because that made sense. And I watch it and, you know, movies have been, we'll call it like a security blanket for me for the majority of my life. And I'm watching Iron Man and I start to think like, wow, Tony Stark, like the great inventor, billionaire playboy, like has everything he could ever want. And he ends up in this cave, right? And in that cave, he kind of realizes that what he was doing and the way his life was going was out of alignment with who and what he truly is. And it took this removing him from his ordinary life of, you know, wealth and fame and fun and putting him in this dark cave where there's nothing, where he has nothing but himself, to realize that this life wasn't it and that there was something else. So when he gets out of this cave, miraculously, he gets back to the United States and he decides to do a complete overhaul on his life. And there were a lot of people championing him on that, but there were also a lot of people that were resisting that. And I remember being in my tent and thinking to myself, what if this is just the first act of my story? What if like the pain that I've been in and all the trials and challenges I've been in for the last 3 or 4 years are just like the first act? And when you think about movies, the first act is a mess, right? For all the characters. Like if you think about like The Matrix. You ever seen The Matrix? So, you know, Neo, he's like this hacker living in this dingy apartment. He's not happy, right? He's like late to work and like no social life. And then Morpheus comes along and says, hey, dude, there's another opportunity here.
Very true.
And the hero always rejects that at first. They go, I'm not doing it, right? Like I did.
Yeah.
All my friends came to me and they're like, hey, dude, you're acting insane. You're like a raging drug addict and alcoholic and you need to go to treatment. I'm like, I'm good. I'm doing fine. You know, they're like, dude, you live in a tent. I'm like, yeah, but I got power. It's like kind of a first class tent. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
And so I just kind of started to realize like, this is just my first act, but to move to the second act where things start to change, I had to release the idea that I could stay in my ordinary world. So I, in the tent, was thinking like, wow, if I want to advance myself to the next act of my movie, I have to let this go.
Yeah.
And to let this go, I have to accept the call to adventure, which is Joseph Campbell's hero's paradigm. That's the point along the story where someone accepts the new opportunity. And so for me, what that looked like was telling my mom that I was ready for help and I was on a plane to treatment that day.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So that was the first act.
Yeah.
So then you went to treatment.
Yep.
Yeah. And you had a good experience there.
Loved it. Yeah.
And so what was the pivotal moment, the aha moment, whatever you want to call it, where you realized that you were this being who could be so much more and able, I know this is a journey, it takes time, but to change your mindset.
Yeah, it was that moment. That moment where, so when I remember when I got to treatment, it was an absolute shit show getting me to rehab, as it is so commonly for us. But like, I remember probably like 2 weeks into treatment, I was like, damn, like my life just in 2 weeks has changed so drastically. And all I did was say yes.
Yeah.
All I did was acknowledge that I can change my mind. It feels impossible. It feels like, I can't do that because, and then there's this list of reasons. But there could equally be a list, probably a longer list of reasons why saying yes, accepting the call, making the move is actually what we deeply desire. And so in that moment in treatment, I looked back at the last 2 weeks, just 2 weeks, and said, wow, like all I did was ignore that list of reasons why I shouldn't or why I couldn't and accept the reasons why I should and could. And look at this result.
Yeah.
Like I have friends, I got food, I got like an awesome therapist, I got people that like genuinely wanted to see me win. And that was all new to me. And so that's in that moment, that's when I knew like, oh my God, I have to do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty much exactly what happened to me too. I went through detox and I was in residential and the same sort of situation. I knew that I needed to help people in one way or another, and that's the direction I needed to head into. And yeah, it's fascinating, like how fast our lives can change once we make that choice to change. And it could be getting sober. It could be a relationship. It could be a career. It could just something spiritual. It's when we actually ask for help, decide to make a change, step through that fear. It's like a whole other world awaits us on the other side.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think like, back to your point earlier, it's like, when I think about like why there's so much focus on the pain and not the pleasure, is that like, I think for a lot of us, and tell me if this is true for you, that like at a certain point of giving back or being of service, we kind of forget or like we downplay just how incredible the transformation we made was. So like I only in moments like this where I'm talking to somebody about like the tent and Iron Man and like being out there, that I'm like, holy shit, like that was real.
Yeah.
And I've created like an empire since then,
right,
of like love and connection and joy and value. And I'll always, I have this core false belief, like TJ would say, that what I do is never quite good enough.
Yeah.
Or that it'll never be enough to undo the bad that I did. And because of that, I'm always trying to outdo whatever's in there.
Yeah.
But because I'm always trying to outdo, I never stop to acknowledge like, holy shit, like, but look at where I was and look at where I am. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And I don't think that as a community of people in recovery, especially long-term recovery in the field, I don't think that we stop and like acknowledge from like a really genuine place how crazy it is, the transformation we made.
Yeah.
Is that true for you?
No, for sure. And yeah, as you're saying that, I was thinking about my own story. And yeah, I think we're very quick to tell other people how proud we are of them and what they've overcome. And, and we can kind of get lost in that and not think about ourselves and go, oh, wow, look at what you've done. Look at what you've accomplished. And yeah, I do that. I'm really big on going out and doing like charitable work and being out in the community. And yeah, a lot of that is because of that belief of like, okay, this is making up for all. And okay, so at what point am I even?
Yeah. And at what point, like, so it's like, I've been following your Instagram for a while. I see the work you do. It's incredible.
Thanks.
Right. And like, I was talking with TJ and I was talking with Dal, my business partner, and we were looking at your Instagram and we're like, damn, dude, like we saw you volunteering, like, and doing all these things. And it's like, what a gift this field is, and all these beautiful people doing this incredible work.
Yeah.
And I long for the day that we can see ourselves the way we're seen by others.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you saw you through my eyes, you would have hit that breaking even point years ago, I'm sure. Right?
Yeah.
But in our own minds, it seems so far away.
Yeah. So what do we need to do to get there?
Well, I'll tell you what worked for me or what works. Working with TJ has genuinely changed my life. And the reason is because I was sober from drugs and alcohol. But I was still addicted to human stuff like needing validation or seeking praise and approval, or like my narratives that are super unhealthy that my therapists have had a blast trying to debug for the last 10 years, right? I was still totally dependent on those things. And I think it was 2017, I met TJ, and Conscious Recovery hadn't been published yet. He sent it to me actually in my email as a PDF. And he said, hey, I'm putting out a book. Like, check it out. Let me know what you think. So I get home. I read the entire book, one sitting on my phone.
Oh, wow.
I was so jazzed. And at the end of the book, I was in tears. I was sobbing because I had longed for something like that the whole time I'd been sober, and I didn't know that's what I was longing for. But the idea that as we are in this moment right now is perfect was so foreign to me that, like, the core false beliefs and these other narratives I held, they were like an overdrive. They were so loud that I believed them to be true. And when TJ offers this other possibility, not the right possibility or that the other one's wrong, but just a different one, that maybe, like, as I am is whole and complete just by nature. And that the work is truly just remembering who that person is, you know, before the drugs, before the drink, before, like, I blew up my life. Maybe it's like a return to that essential nature.
Yeah.
It's not trying to create a different Jeremy. It's trying to get back to the OG Jeremy.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's a good way to say
yeah.
it. Yeah.
And it's like that my 10-year-old inner child was at play. He was fun and full of love and loved theater, and, you know, and I drowned it out. And Conscious Recovery, and for me, like, what my work is as a person in long-term recovery is just consistently trying to remember the essence of who and what I truly am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that it's a journey, and that you
Exactly.
continue down that road.
Yep.
It's not like, okay, now, oh, I've got this much time, I'm good now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
like, if you're in early recovery, just, you got to trust the process.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I know we've been talking about very personal stuff, but on
Sure.
another more personal topic, I know you're passionate about your adopted.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. I don't know if I could say that. Or
Of
if I was
course.
really kind of
Yeah.
waiting for you to segue into
Yeah.
it. But,
Yeah.
and so what work are you doing with that?
Yeah, so I was, I'll just give you kind of cliff notes.
Yeah.
But when I was a baby, I was adopted, and my birth family, my birth parents were had their own addiction issues, both of them, and my birth mom was very young and in no place to raise me. And when I was 10 years old, I got a letter from them. They had 2 kids after me.
Oh, wow.
That they kept, and I got a letter that I was adopted. And
So you didn't know up until then? Or?
I knew.
Okay.
I knew, but it was like confirmation.
Yeah.
You know, like when you're a kid, kids are so intuitive. Like they just know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're so, because their intellect isn't quite revving at full speed yet, they depend on energy. And so in a way, they're just so beyond our capacity as adults because they don't think, they feel. You know, and I felt very on the outside, very disconnected, very different. You know, my parents, Bruce and Molly Miller, are like as white as can be, and I'm like this little brown Mexican kid, right? And so parents would always be like, "What's the deal here?" You know, and it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, there's a deal. I don't know." You know, so I became very curious and interested about my origins. And in 2018, I found my birth family. It was like
wow.
craziest story how I found them.
Yeah.
And then I met them.
Oh, wow.
And like formed a relationship with them.
Wow.
And so,
What was that like when you met them?
oh, it was crazy.
Yeah.
Can I swear on this?
You
Are
can
we good
swear
to
all you want,
Okay, cool.
yeah.
Yeah, it was fucking crazy. You know, because like so my birth brother passed away in 2008, which coincidentally was the year I was living in the tent. And I looked up the date he passed, and it was 3 weeks before my attempted suicide.
Whoa.
And so there's like,
Gave me goosebumps.
yeah, there's a very like, there are forces at play that I can't describe.
Yeah.
And I had looked for them my whole life, and it was a closed adoption through the Catholic Church. So I didn't have last names. I didn't have addresses, phone numbers, nothing. All I had were a handful of pictures, a letter, and their first names. So it's like trying to Google that is impossible. Like, what do you even?
Yeah.
And so I met up with a friend to get coffee one day, and she said, you know, she's like a witch. She says that she's a witch, you know, she does the tarot and all that weird shit, you know, and I'm into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'll always hear it out. And she goes, Jeremy, I got to tell you, like, I feel like you should try and find him again. Like, I just have a feeling. And I'm like, dude, like, I've looked for 20 years. Like, there's nothing, you know, I can't, how do you do the same thing over and over? You know, it's like, but she was like, no, dude, like, I feel it. Like, you should. And so I said, all right, fuck it. Like, let me go see what's up. So I take the letter out, I take all the pictures and I put them on my table. And in the letter my birth mom wrote to me when I was 10, she included that my birth brother, Nova, had muscular dystrophy, a very specific type, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And so I Google it and find out that the mortality rate is super high. And I find out kind of what the average life expectancy is. So I had an idea that he passed away, and I had a range wherein he passed away. And Nova's a very unique name.
Yeah.
So I take all the research I did on muscular dystrophy, and I started Googling that with his name, right? So I kind of had a window.
Wow.
So let's see, like, where does this take me?
Yeah.
And I found his obituary.
No.
Yeah. So it was like a lightning bolt because it was confirmation that my baby brother had passed away. I never got to meet him, and that fucking bummed me out. But in the obituary were the first and last names of everybody in my family. So I said, holy shit, like, this is the farthest I've ever come in this process. And I was in a complete flow state. My hands were moving, but I wasn't moving them, you know? And I type their names in to Google, and I'm not getting much. And, you know, I type them into Facebook, and I'm not getting much. And in the letter, it said, you know, we live in Missouri, you know, so I'm looking in Missouri, all the cities in Missouri, all the towns in Missouri. But then I just got this feeling like, well, they probably got divorced, not to be a cynic, but, you know, flip a coin, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So like maybe they moved back to Denver where I was born. So then I start putting it into Facebook in like my hometown. And I'm scrolling. So my birth sister's name, I won't say her name, but it's super common. Okay.
Okay.
And I'm scrolling Facebook like this, just like at all of the people that like Susan Smith will say, right? There's so many. I'm just scrolling. And I look away and I come back, and right there was her. Swear to God. So I click it and I'm like, oh my God, we look exactly the same. I start looking at pictures, and there's Star Wars and Quentin Tarantino and movies and music, all the same stuff.
Whoa.
And I'm like, holy shit. So I go to her family, and there's my birth dad. I go to his page. There's him playing guitar, shredding guitar, looks just like me. And from there, I found my birth mom.
What did that feel like when you first found that?
It felt like it was like feeling like you're at home for the first time ever. You know, like I'd never looked like anybody growing up. I didn't look like my parents. I didn't look like my sister, and I looked like them. And to not resemble anybody is kind of a weird thing, but I looked like them. So it was just electric, you know? And so I wrote my birth mom a message. I'm in like full blown panic, you know, like, and I wrote a very beautiful message, and she didn't reply. She wasn't reading it. And I was just tripping, you know, and the goal was to find her. That was the connection. that I wanted. You know, I wanted everybody, but it was her that I'd been kind of obsessive over my whole life. And so I sent it to my birth dad, and he read it and replied right away, "Oh my God, I'm on the floor crying right now. We've waited for this day our whole lives."
Were they
Like,
trying to find you?
Yeah.
Or okay.
yeah. And he was on the phone with her, and they're all crying, and everybody's crying. And I filmed me sending and receiving that because I was like, maybe I'll do something with this someday.
Yeah.
And we found each other and talked on the phone, and then we met.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
Yeah, I don't even know what to say. I'm like
Yeah.
speechless.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And so, you know, since then, it's been really like understanding adverse childhood experiences, understanding my own feelings of abandonment, rejection, and unworthiness, and trying to bring clarity to. We talk about like attachment disorders and, you know, attachment stuff a lot, but there's not, for me at least, there's not a lot of clarity as to like what to do with that.
Yeah.
And so, and then, you know, sadly, my birth dad, he passed away,
I'm sorry.
cancer. And so there was like there was more, like we didn't get enough time.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I tried getting him sober and it didn't go super well. And it was like it wasn't healed.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that time.
Yeah.
And so the work I do now, like kind of on the side is like I just started a podcast, like my 10th podcast. And I'm writing a book. And the goal I have in mind is to offer kind of an intellectual and emotional roadmap to understanding self in the context of adoption.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
You'll have to come back when the book is done.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
How far into it are you?
I'm about halfway done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever written a book before?
Nope.
How long do you think it's going to take?
My target is to have the first draft done by the end of the year.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to hit you up in January.
Let's
and see
do it.
Where you're at.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
What a remarkable story.
Thank you so much.
I just love you.
Yeah.
I didn't know like a lot about you. And now
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, we're best friends.
Yeah. I'm in. Yeah.
So what would you tell somebody out there struggling before we wrap this up and,
Sure.
and where they can find you if they want to talk?
Yeah. So if someone's listening to this and they're curious about pursuing something else, like a life in recovery or whatever that may be, all I would offer is to take to heart that this is just the first act and that it's supposed to be hard and it's supposed to be a mess. That's perfect. And that the second act is incredible and you fumble around and it is confusing and it's supposed to be. And the third act is where you will find victory. And the beauty is that we cycle through these three acts over the entirety of our lives. And it's almost like little three acts are happening in the bigger three acts of our entire lives. And so if it's hard, it's okay. It's okay that it's hard. It's very hard. And we are calling you to action to get out of the ordinary world of what you've been in and take a bigger step into something miraculous. And if you do accept that call, I promise it's worth it.
I love that.
Yeah.
And Rehab Road Trips?
That's us. Yeah. So we're at Rehab Road Trips.
Okay.
rehabroadtrips.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll see you next time, guys. Bye.